Welcome to the Big Movement Podcast. If you're ready to create results and make huge strides in your business, finances, personal development, and health, then you're in the right place. Pushing past excuses and powering through procrastination can be a challenge alone. Here, you'll get the support, tools, and knowledge you need to get to the level you desire in your business and life. Let's get started with your host, Byron Ingram.
And welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, we have Tim Stringer, who is a productivity coach, consultant, and teacher based out of Vancouver, Canada. He founded Technically Simple in 2003 to support people in using technology effectively. So we're going to learn how he does this and so much more because, let's face it, if you're not using technology in your business, well, I wonder what type of business you're in, and you're probably going to be listening to the podcast anyways. So let's dive in and learn how he does this and more. So Tim, welcome.
Thanks, Byron. It's great to be here.
Sure, definitely. So how did you get into this world of being a productivity coach and consultant? Because it's something that it takes a unique skill set to help people improve how productive they are throughout the day.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's kind of I took kind of a roundabout road to get here, which I think is often the case with entrepreneurs. So just to give a brief history, I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering back in 1990 and worked in the corporate world for about 13 years. I was a software developer. I managed teams of engineers. I managed some very large projects as a project manager. So I really got a good sense of what life in the corporate world is like. And then in 2003, I decided it was time to go off on my own, and that's when I founded Technically Simple. And the overarching goal was really to have people make effective use of technology, because I saw all of this technology continuing to show up, and I noticed it was very often a source of stress for people versus something that actually increases the quality of life and increases productivity. So I worked at that. I found very early on that coaching was a big part of the work that I needed to do, and it wasn't enough just to have the technology and learn how to use it. There needed to be a real clarity of purpose, and I did some professional training in coaching, and that continues to be a big part of the work that I do. The real productivity side of things came through a very challenging event in 2008, and that's when I was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer and had to put the business on hold and much of my life on hold, really just to focus on the healing process. And I got some very powerful insights as I was going through the healing. And fortunately, I had a great coach to work with myself that really helped to kind of guide the process and inform the learning. And also one of the things that I took an interest in those days is David Allen's Getting Things Done. And I actually applied his methodology as part of my healing from cancer. And that, I think, was a big part of my healing journey, and that's ultimately what led me down the path that I'm on right now, which is really focused on the productivity side of things, with technology definitely playing a big role in that.
Yeah, I think it's a great journey that you've been on there. That technology is something for some people, it can be the source of so much anguish and frustration because they don't understand how to leverage it.
Mm-hmm. And I think a big piece of that is it's not necessarily the technology itself. It's what's often missing is an approach to using the technology, a clarity, having some practice methodologies like GTD to apply to it. And as I like to say, owning a calculator doesn't make you a mathematician. And I think that's where we really need to go into the back to basic principles, and I think that's one thing that technology has done is it's kind of buried some of those basic human skills that are, I think, more essential than ever in this world that we live in now.
It is indeed. It's sometimes I think technology, I don't want to say it becomes a crutch, but we have to understand what are the processes behind something in order to truly be productive. Otherwise, we can start just spending too much time spinning our wheels and never making progress.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of emphasis on becoming efficient and organized, which is a great pursuit, and it's definitely a key part of the process. But without a clear sense of direction, I think it's very easy to get more efficient at going around in circles and really not even getting organized for anything meaningful. So the bigger picture is definitely key, as well as the more sort of mechanical parts of the system.
So how do you typically see people in the workplace? Because with technology being such an important part of this whole process, where do you typically see people being stuck at in terms of productivity? Where they're like, okay, I don't know what to do, or a company might have invested a large amount of technology. Like, okay, we have all these systems, but then people are like, yes, great, but now what?
Yeah, so it's part of it is around creating some space. Some people call it margin, some room to breathe, and a space where people can actually hit the pause button and look at the bigger picture. The two things that I often look at first are probably the two biggest time wasters in the corporate world, and that's email and meetings, and even just making some adjustments, even if it's not sort of the ultimate shift in those areas, even just with some fairly small changes. Reducing the amount of time that goes into those two things can have a dramatic impact. And it not only does it give people more time to play with and give them back their energy and attention, but it also, I think, creates some momentum around the whole process and saying, okay, if I freed up an hour and, over the course of the last week, what could I do over 3 months or 6 months? It could completely transform things.
Oh, and definitely. I think it's something that in terms of the corporate world and just in the business world in general, people allow those two things, meetings and emails, to cripple them. You think of how much time people spend on emails itself; it's almost sickening.
Definitely, I've heard someone say email is a task list that other people write on. I think they think that's very true.
Oh yes,
and I think it's important to distinguish between requests that are being made and having a clear sense of choice into what's the best use of my time and energy, and not especially if someone tends to be a people pleaser, not feeling the need to do everything that's asked of them, because that's kind of a recipe for disaster in a way.
Right. So let's start with email. How should people minimize that? Because there's some people have this notion, well, if I don't constantly respond to every single email that comes in, how am I ever going to keep my clients happy?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things to do is I call it managing the deluge. So just like I know you've had some major flooding in Texas, so you can probably relate to this. But first of all, kind of cutting things off at the source and just limiting the amount of email that comes into the inbox, because at the end of the day, we only have so much attention. We can only make so many decisions, and if we're getting a lot of kind of noise flowing into the inbox, it's actually depleting us quite significantly without really giving any value. So that can be like unsubscribing from mailing lists, and the only caveat there is make sure you actually subscribe to it in the first place. If you unsubscribe from mailing that you've received as spam, you might actually get more and more spam because you're telling the spammer that you're an actual real person who's clicked the unsubscribe button. So just one caveat there. And then that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit, and then going beyond that and saying, okay, who's sending me emails that I don't really need to be CC'd on, or just kind of looking at it in terms of I've only got the capacity to handle so many emails, and which ones really belong, and which ones can I be taken off the list from altogether, or maybe instead of getting every communication, just getting a summary from somebody at the end of the week or something like that.
Right. And those are great ways to do it, because it's amazing how many people just don't think about the amount of garbage that they're subjected to. Like for me, I typically only check my email a couple times a day. And in most of the time, it's a quick glance. Anything come in? Great. I'll get to it later. So it just goes at list at whatever time I'm looking at it, go through it, and it's like, okay, there's that way mentally I'm processing stuff, but I don't touch it. Or I look at the number of junk emails in there. Like if people want to email me stuff, like no. But what I like to tell clients too is, if you want to get my attention and you don't send me email, send me a text, because I guarantee you I will respond a whole lot faster than if you're going to send me email, which I might not check for an entire day.
Yeah, and I think it's a matter of choosing the right tool for the job. I generally discourage against people sending me texts unless it's something that really requires my attention in the moment.
Right.
Because that can become another that can become another sort of attention stealer right there.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
And that's why I tell people, like, if you text me, it better be important. Just don't text me with something random, like, because then I'm just going to give you that frown, like, why are you cluttering up my phone with that?
Yeah,
Versus,
exactly.
like, send me something where, like, if it's a detailed email and you need me to look at it in a timely manner, it's like, hey, send you an email on that topic we discussed. Okay, great. Then I know it's there. But otherwise, no, I don't want to be bothered with the random stuff. Like, well, I had a question on the, like, why are you asking me this? It's in the email. Read it.
Yeah. Or if they have a question that needs an answer within 30 minutes because they're going into a meeting, I think that's appropriate. But if they want an answer sometime this week, then I think email is a much better choice.
Right. You have to decide what's the best way around it. Now, of course, with meetings, that other quintessential time waster out there, what do you believe that people should be doing to either eliminate meetings or make them more productive?
Well, it's really being intentional about meetings. I think there's a lot of organizations that have like their weekly sales meeting or something just because that's what they've been doing for years without really, questioning what's the purpose of this meeting. So I think in order to have a meeting, there needs to be an agenda, and the agenda essentially defines the purpose. And there needs to be a clear sense of what outcome we want to get out of this meeting. And that can be, there needs to be a decision made about this, or people need to have some actions to move a project forward, or something along those lines. And if a meeting is held without those parameters there, it's most likely going to be just kind of a random sharing of ideas, and it might end with no decisive action being taken place, and there might be little to no value that actually came out of the meeting. So it's really looking at the intention, looking at the value, and if that intention is there, a meeting that would normally take an hour could be done in 15-20 minutes, and suddenly there's a 45, 50 minutes or whatever it is freed up from just a kind of a shift in perspective around it.
Right. I'm always a fan, like, if there's going to be a meeting, there has to be an agenda, because I don't want to go into it with that notion, oh, we're just going to talk about whatever comes up. Like, no, we're not, because that's a time waster.
The one exception, I think, is it is useful to have brainstorming meetings sometimes.
Right.
I think those still need to have a focal point. There needs to be an intention. Those ones, I think it's acceptable, not to have such an agenda, because that's really putting people into a creative mode and letting ideas fly and things like that. And
right.
So those have values, but again, they're coming from a place of intention. They're not just a random, getting people together just in case we have something to talk about.
Well, even then, if you think about it, the agenda, it's today it's a brainstorming session about blank. And that's where all the focus has to be, like, what about this other project? Well, no, we're talking about this one thing here because we need to direct our energy towards it, versus a thousand other things. And before you know it, even though it could be a brainstorming session, you see so many times they start talking about these other things, which are all important, but it takes away from that exact reason why you showed up in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think for those types of meetings, it's essential to have a moderator, somebody who keeps things on topic and keeps an eye on the time and so forth. And sometimes it makes sense for that moderator to be someone from outside the company, because they're not so they don't have a vested interest in what's discussed at the meeting. They're really there to facilitate the discussion and to keep it on track.
And those are great things. I can think back to the times that I'd run meetings and I'd pass out an agenda, like, what's this for? It's like, it's keeping us on track. And the moment someone said, but I want to talk about, like, does this thing appear on the list? No. Does it affect everyone else in the room? No. It's not being discussed here today. They're like, but, like, nope, sorry. And it would frustrate people because they're used to just to be able to air things. But when I would look at it, like, wow, my meetings, they would be done in about 20 minutes compared to when other people are running them, an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, I think one of the keys to keeping them short is to keep them small as well.
Right.
And I think anytime you have more than about 5 people in a meeting, it becomes a presentation, or it ends up being much longer than it actually needs to be. So it's better to have like 3 15-minute meetings each on a specific topic versus 1 2-hour meeting that tries to cover all 3 of those topics, and probably is actually less effective than the 3 15-minute meetings.
Oh, yes, because you think about what happens after a certain point in time, people's attention span starts drifting away, and they're no longer focused on what needs to happen in the meeting. They're thinking about, okay, what's going on at their desk? What are the phone calls they have, other things. So they're no longer being effective.
Yeah, or they might even be checking email on their phone or their computer or something like that, and they're not really engaged with the meeting anyway, so they're kind of attempting to multitask, which never seems to work very well.
Right. Now, since you bring up the topic of multitasking, and you have some people that believe, oh no, I can multitask. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, as humans, we're not designed to multitask. I think the exception would be if it's something that you're very practiced at. So if you're a real expert in the kitchen, you could maybe be, making this gourmet dinner while you're talking to the guests that you have over. If someone is less skilled in the kitchen, they probably want to be giving their entire attention just so they don't start a fire or something as they're sort of balancing things. So I think there is a notion of multitasking to some extent as we get very skilled at things. But if we're doing any sort of knowledge work, anything that involves, creating something new, then that task really needs our full attention. And anytime we're pulled away from that, it can take a considerable amount of time. It might take, even from a simple interruption, it could take 20 minutes to get back to that level of focus that we were at before the interruption took place. So it does depend to some extent on what the work is, but generally speaking, productivity goes up dramatically with unitasking, and people get this sort of false sense of being productive when they're multitasking. But if you were to kind of tally up the score at the end of the day, I think the person who focused on one thing at a time would have accomplished far more in less time than the person who's trying to switch gears constantly.
Oh, yes. I think it's something that people don't realize how much time it takes you to readjust to being focused on a task versus you're going from an email, you're answering the phone, you're doing one thing and another, not realizing you're not very productive as opposed to blocking out periods of time for a certain task.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, yeah. And it's something that Cal Newport has done a lot of writing on this subject, where we don't automatically become good at focusing, and so he talks about the process of building the kind of ability to focus and building that up gradually, and even if we're in environments that are by nature not very focused, like an open office environment, or we're in a type of job where we're interrupted constantly, it's still important to be intentional to make it part of the routine, part of the day, to build in like focus times where there's very little chance of interruption. And if that means going into work before other people get there, or maybe working from home for one day a week or something like that, I think there's always a way around it, even in environments that don't really lend themselves to focus.
Right. And you hit on something there I think it's really critical that people have to understand that they're with multitasking. Sure, like if someone's in the kitchen after a certain level of proficiency, you're going to be able to have a certain level of a conversation, but it can, I don't want to say it can't go beyond a certain point, but if you think about it, it has to be something that it doesn't take away from the focus that on the task that you're doing. It's kind of like if someone's playing a song on a guitar or on the piano, they could have a certain level of conversation, but the moment you have to add in more mental focus to, like, let's say we're going to talk about something that requires deep thinking, you're not going to be able to do the two at the same time. It's going to be impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the world that we live in, but people have generalized that, oh, you could do all these things at the same time. Like, no, not really. It's kind of like saying, imagine someone, let's say, trying to walk on a high wire while playing the guitar. Probably not going to happen.
Unless they were extremely talented trapeze, or what do they call them? People who walk on high wires.
Right.
Unless they were extremely talented gymnasts and they could practically do it in their sleep. At that point, maybe they could play the guitar while doing it. But even then, I say that's probably not such a good idea, because it's probably better
right.
they just can give their full attention to walking the high wire.
Right. Let's say, like, focus on not falling or playing an amazing guitar riff. Yeah, not a good combination to choose from. But that's the way we look at stuff. Like, well, sure you can, but that attention, it's really powerful. So, what are some of the other things that people should be doing to be more productive throughout the day, so they don't find themselves at the end of their workday going, well, I didn't do anything. I just showed up and it just kind of went poof and it was gone.
Well, it can be very helpful to do time blocking, so to actually block off time for specific activities. And that might seem a little constraining in a way, but it serves a couple of purposes. One is it makes sure that thing that's important that you're working on actually gets the time and energy it deserves. And then the other piece is just making sure there's not an overcommitment that takes place, which is very easy to do, to commit to doing more things than are really possible within the space of a day. So I find once I start blocking off time for things, I get a sense of how much time do I have left over for other requests and things that come along. So I think that can be really useful. Using a Pomodoro timer where you schedule is typically 25 minutes of work, and then you take a 5-minute break and then do another 25, and you do 3 of these work cycles and then take a longer break. That can be really useful. There's something about knowing that there's going to be a break coming up that makes it easier to focus. And I don't always follow that to the letter, but I find that kind of the spirit of that is very useful. Just to say, okay, I'm really tempted to go on Facebook right now, but I've committed to sticking with this 25-minute work block, even though, sort of these habits are pulling me to other ways. Say, okay, it's only 25 minutes, I know I'm going to make it till the end, and then I can take a break and do some other things. So just, starting with those, even if it's, for some people, it's a breakthrough to focus on something for 5 minutes, and even that might be a little uncomfortable, might be a bit of a stretch, but getting the sort of the experience of doing it and saying, okay, I made it 5 minutes without checking my email, maybe I can stretch that out to 10 minutes now, and just sort of gradually building up the time and not sort of setting these impossibly high bars at the beginning. I think it's much more useful to set something that's going to be a bit of a stretch, but have the satisfaction of actually reaching it and getting to the point where that becomes natural, and then just raising the bar a little farther.
Right. And I think it's something that's important that you said there with setting those goals that are reachable, but it's not too far of a stretch. Because too many times when you think about productivity, people want to make this immense to-do list that no one that's human could ever achieve in a single day. But then they feel disappointed at the end of it. So what defines really a reachable goal for somebody?
I find it's best to focus on a shorter term, especially if it's something large, like if someone's building a new house or something like that, just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to work on the new house, is probably going to be overwhelming. But they might just have a project which is going to be, deciding on what builder to go with, or even that might be divided into smaller projects. So it's setting an objective that's reachable, that's in support of a potentially much bigger objective. And the satisfaction of reaching that, I think, is what helps with motivation, versus having a major objective that's going to take a year or two to reach, and not really getting any sense of movement towards it, because the steps are so small in comparison to the size of the goal. I find that's where people tend to procrastinate and get frustrated and maybe even abandon the thing altogether.
Right, exactly. Because I think we live in a society that people are being conditioned. You have to set these big, audacious goals, so that people translate that into, okay, every day I have to write down every big goal that I want to achieve. And that's not really the case. It's you want to have those bigger goals, but from what you're saying is you want to break it down to, here's the smaller component. Like if you're building a house, of identifying the builder today, or it might be identifying what type of the paint colors are going to be, or something that's really small, not here's the entire house that you have to be thinking about all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing with those big goals is they're subject to change. I see goals as something to steer towards, not necessarily the destination. So it'd be like if you're out in your boat and you see this island off in the distance, and you say, "Oh, I'd love to go and visit that island." So maybe it's going to take you hours to reach it, but as you get closer to it, you see, oh, I never even noticed there's this other island, over to my left, and say, okay, that looks even like an even more inviting place to go. So I'm going to change course and go and visit that. So I think without any sort of goal, there's nothing to steer towards, and we tend to procrastinate and stay stuck and do like meaningless activities. But having some sense of direction without being attached to actually reaching that destination, I find is a really nice balance. And then we can be really open to what comes along. And really, especially over the past 8 years or so, there's been so many kind of serendipitous things that have shown up where I hadn't even imagined going in that direction. But the fact that I was moving on the path that I was in the first place was what allowed me to even see those things in the first place.
Right. That's so critical that you have to be open to that possibility, because life's going to throw those detours at you, and you have to be able to adapt accordingly, where you know the destination, but the route to get there is going to change. Where you think about everything that you went through as you're building your business. It wasn't like, oh, okay, everything comes to a grinding halt. You have to look at, well, now what do you do? How do you adjust accordingly? Do you just kind of throw up your hands and you say, that's it, I kind of quit? Most people
or
don't.
maybe someone was so focused on their business looking a certain way, they didn't even realize that there were all kinds of opportunities that were everywhere around them, but they had the blinders on. They said, no, my business needs to look like this. And sometimes it's about letting go of that way of things, the way things you thought where things were going to go or they're supposed to go or whatever, and realize that, just the fact that you're moving towards something is ultimately what, really creates all of these opportunities.
It is indeed, and that's what we have to be focused on more and more. It's that opportunities are going to present themselves day in and day out, but where we have to start filtering things. It's which ones are supportive of us arriving at that destination, or which ones are going to take us away from what we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and that's one of the biggest challenges I think there is, because it can be so tempting to say yes to everything. I think especially as a new business owner, and where we might not have kind of as much of a luxury of turning things down if we're just getting started and just building experience. But once that experience is there and we're really well established, then that old habit can kind of still be there. Oh, I need to say yes to everything. And I still catch myself, even after having a business for so many years, being tempted to say yes to something and having to kind of catch myself and say, no, that's definitely not, you don't do that sort of work anymore, or that's, not the type of client that is a good fit for you, those sorts of things. So it's just being, I think, even just giving that moment to pause before saying yes, especially if our sort of default tendency is to say yes, even just giving 5 seconds to say, okay, I'm about to say yes, but just give me a moment to, just pause on that and kind of tune in to not just the sort of the cerebral decision-making process, but also that sort of reaction within the body. Does this resonate? Does this really feel like I'm saying yes out of desperation?
Right. So in that case, how do people start filtering out to be able to say no to things? Because like you said, in the beginning stage of a business, it's natural for someone to say, yes, I can do it. And they're thinking inside, why did I say yes to that? How do people start getting past that?
I don't know if there's any magic formula to that. I think one thing is just being really clear on what is the purpose of the business, and who do you like to work with, what's a good match for a client, and even just being really clear on what are some red flags. Like if somebody's calling and saying, okay, I desperately need this, and I get this sometimes where people will say to me, I need to get productive by the end of the weekend or something like this. And that's a definite that's a definite red flag. And sometimes they're like throwing money at me, and it's really tempting to say, oh yeah, no, I can help you with that. But so earlier on, I might have been tempted to say yes, and maybe there were even times where I've kind of got sucked into that. But nowadays, I can just see right through that. I can see that red flag so clearly now. And even though it's, would be extremely easy to say yes, I realize, that's not the way I work. I really see productivity as a practice that people cultivate over time. And I'm committed to people getting some short-term wins in terms of things that are going to help to motivate them moving forward. But I don't claim to say, okay, a week from now, pay me $1,000 and you'll be, the super productive person, because that would be, really selling something that I couldn't deliver.
Right. And I think that's something to distinguish you from the masses, because if you look out there, you're going to see a lot of those courses, quote unquote, that say, oh, increase your productivity over the weekend. Like, it's a habit. You're not going to develop a new habit in 3 days. It's just not going to happen. It's something that's going to be ingrained in you over time. If someone spent 30 plus years developing bad habits that worked against their productivity, a single 3-day weekend is not going to change it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also they might have multiple habits that aren't serving them, and the sort of temptation is to want to change all of them at once. But I really emphasize the importance of saying, okay, let's choose one of those, and we'll focus. What's the new habit you're going to focus on for the next 40 days? And I want to make sure it's something that you're committed to doing. That's going to be a bit of a stretch, but you're not going from lazing around on the couch to, running 10K every day or something like that. So Right. It needs to be grounded in reality and in terms of what the person's, where they are in the moment. And I think a key part of this is, and this was really the foundation of an approach I developed called holistic productivity, is that if you're creating a positive shift in one area of life, it's going to positively impact all other areas of life. So you actually don't need to be focusing on all areas of life at once. And in fact, it's really more about saying, okay, where's the most strategic place that I need to put my attention? And that might not be the place that seems to need the attention the most. So if someone's really struggling at work and they're just not getting very much done, maybe they really need to focus on getting more sleep at night, and maybe they need to be exercising more, so they're going to be less stressed when they go into work in the morning, things like that. So it's kind of taking the pressure off to say, okay, you can impact your entire life just by choosing one or a few specific areas to impact, and that's really all you need to do. And that's going to give you much more of an effective shift in your life overall than trying to do everything all at once.
Right. So with the whole notion of holistic productivity, how does someone decide on what area to work on first? Because obviously, if it's going to bleed over into other areas of their life, they have to decide. So what are the things someone should be looking for?
Well, one exercise I often do with people is this Wheel of Life exercise, which is really popular in coaching circles. And the idea is to go through each of the major areas of life, including like health and finances, relationships, work, and give each of them a rating to say, a 1 would be, I'm just not satisfied in this area, it's not working for me. A 10 would be, this area is like off the charts amazing, it's just flowing beautifully. And a lot of them are going to be somewhere in between. So doing that exercise, even just taking a minute to do that, can be very revealing in itself. And then people have something visual to look at, and they say, okay, I notice, so I know intuitively, if I spend a little time, it could be even an area that's at a 9, they're going to take to a 10, and they might know intuitively that's going to create a shift that's going to impact other areas of life the most. If it's not obvious where to work, I'd just say kind of pick one, because you can't go wrong. If you're positively shifting one of those areas, you're positively shifting your life in general. So rather than worry about picking the wrong one, just choose one. That's where working with a coach can help, just to really clarify that, and the coach can get a sense of what's kind of taking a lot of their attention, kind of draw out, what do they know that they need to work on that they're not really admitting to in the moment, those sorts of things.
Right. That's so critical, that people have to understand the different areas of their life, whether it's the health or finances and so forth, so they know where the attention's going to be, because without it, you're just, I like to say, you're throwing spaghetti at the wall and you're hoping that it's going to stick.
Yep, exactly. And David Allen has a great quote. He says, if you don't pay appropriate attention to what has your attention, it's going to take more of your attention than it deserves. And that's something I work with pretty much daily to, especially if I'm feeling kind of flustered myself or overwhelmed. And even as a productivity consultant, I get that way as well, just like everybody else. And the first thing I look at is what's actually got my attention. And my attention might be on something that seems very trivial. No, then that's not important today. But unless I give some attention to that and not necessarily do anything about it in the moment, but at least make a commitment to do something about it. If I don't do something, then it's going to be kind of like one of those nagging little kids that's kind of tugging at your pant leg. And until you give some attention to that child, they're probably going to persist for hours even, I think.
Right, exactly. You have to decide where that focus is going to flow to, because without it, you're just wandering around in aimless directions. That happens to so many people because they're wondering, well, how come they're not being more productive? They're doing different things, but at the end of the day, it might be something as simple as, like you said, someone might need, let's say, more sleep at night. And, that could solve all their problems, because if they're sluggish during the day, it's not a matter of they don't have the capability of being productive. They just don't have the energy reserves to actually be productive.
Yeah, so with a good night's sleep, they might literally get more done in a couple of hours than they used to in like an 8-hour day. It can be that dramatic. And suddenly they've freed up all kinds of time and energy and things for other things, for expansion and so forth. So the changes can be dramatic. I think the key piece is being willing to hit the pause button and just kind of look at things and look at the state of life, what's working, what's not working. Not from a right or wrong, this needs to be fixed, more from one of the pillars of my holistic productivity approach is acceptance, and just to say, okay, and this is the way life is. I've got credit card debt. I'm maybe have an illness. I'm not sleeping very well at night, but being willing to accept, to say, okay, this is where I'm starting from. This is where I'm building from. Not to say being complacent and saying, okay, things are never going to be better. It's actually quite the opposite. It's to say, okay, things are the way they are, and over the next week, I'm going to create at least a small shift, and the week after that, I'm going to create another shift, and it's amazing the momentum that can be built from that.
Oh, definitely. It's a very powerful thing when you look at it. So it's something that's extremely important to be able to do that. So as we begin wrapping everything up, what's one thing that you recommend for people to do if they're truly wanting to increase their productivity?
I think, hitting the pause button, and a very useful exercise, I do this with a lot of my clients, is to do a mind map of what David Allen calls the areas of responsibility or areas of focus. And if you're not familiar with mind maps, they're basically a graphical outline. So the idea is you put yourself at the center of this mind map, and you say, okay, what are my major responsibilities in life? Maybe you have a job and you have responsibilities around that, or you own a business, or certainly personal areas of responsibility. Maybe you're very involved in some community work on the side. But just actually go through and start generally, and then go into the specifics of what am I going to be responsible for in my life, my health, my children, all the different aspects of my job, and really map that all out. And it can be just can be a little daunting at sometimes, because these mind maps can get to be a little crazy in terms of how expansive they are. But then you have a sense of, okay, what is my time and energy going into? You can look through it and say what's getting more time and attention than it needs to be. What are some areas that I can kind of prune from this tree? Maybe I've been on this board of directors for the last 10 years and I realize it's taking 10 hours a month, which I'd rather put into other things. So it's being able to see things visually in that way allows us to see things much more objectively than if they're just thoughts swimming around in our mind. So I find that's time really well spent, even just taking an hour to do that, and to gradually develop it over time and maybe review it about once a month. Really helps create direction and helps to identify kind of wasted time and energy.
Oh, that's excellent. And that's what people really need. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And how can people learn more about what you do and connect with you?
Sure. So they can go to technicallysimple.com, which is basically the hub of my business, and there's links to other things, including my holistic productivity website. I also specialize in a program called OmniFocus for Mac and iOS, and I have an entire site, learnomnifocus.com, that's dedicated to that, and built up a community around that where people can get together in virtual conference rooms and have discussions and so forth. So, but technically simple.com will point to all of the different facets of my business.
Oh, excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you once again for coming onto the podcast today and sharing your wealth of wisdom.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, Byron.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Big Movement Podcast today. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now that you've surely been inspired to take your entrepreneurial career and business to the next level, you can stop by the website and get more. And if you're ready to boost your business brand, be sure to grab your free report, 7 Easy Steps to Build Your Brand Today.